Last week we were in Matthew 14, but we were in verses 13 through 21, and we looked at this moment where Jesus in Matthew 14, he took 5 pieces of bread and he took 2 little fish and miraculously, obviously by the power of God, turned that 5 pieces of bread and those 2 little fish into a meal, into a feast for probably around 20,000 people. It says there's 5,000 men there, but there was also women and children. There was probably closer to 20,000 people there. Jesus took 5 little pieces of bread and 2 little fish and made a feast for 20,000 people. It's absolutely miraculous. It's the only miracle besides the resurrection that's recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. But I think, and it's what we talked about last week, I think that what is sometimes missed in that story is how the story starts. And before Jesus feeds those 5,000 or 20,000 people, we saw in the previous week the hardships that Jesus was going through. We saw the fact that Jesus was rejected by his townspeople and his family. We saw the fact that Jesus' own cousin was murdered. We saw all of those things. And right before Jesus feeds all of those people last week, he is out by himself. He took off by himself to go spend some time by himself. This is Jesus. We don't think about these things sometimes, but Jesus, after hearing the bad news, after hurting those ways, he took off by himself to spend some time in a deserted place. And that's where he is. He's by himself out there when 20,000 people show up, and he feeds them all miraculously. So it's an interesting thing to see his humanity, but also heavily, it's a passage that very heavily contrasts the fact that he is God. He turned 5 little pieces of bread and 2 little fish into a meal for 20,000, but he's also fully man, and he was hurting. You see the contrast in that passage, and it's incredible. There's a lot for us to learn from that. So that's where we came from last week. We came from that miracle happening in Matthew 14. And we're going to still obviously be in Matthew 14. We're continuing. But when we pick up in Matthew 14 today, we're picking up right as that meal comes to a close. Right as that meal of all those people ate, everybody's filled, they pick up all the baskets of the extra food. As that meal's coming to a close, that's where we're picking up today. And so today we're going to be in 22 through 36. So let's read this. Matthew 14, 22 through 36. So again, this is right after the meal. I'll just read 21, so it gives us the context. It says, "Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children." So all of the people had just eaten. And now picking up in 22, it says, "Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into a boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, 'It's a ghost!' And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid.' And Peter answered him and said, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water.' And he said, 'Come.' And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, 'Lord, save me.' And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, 'O you of little faith, why did you doubt?' And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.' And when they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent out to all the surrounding region, brought to him all who were sick, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many touched it were made perfectly well." So, said, so the miraculous had happened. Last week we saw the miraculous feeding of all of these people. And then we get to verse 22, and we just read it, but what does verse 22 say? It says, right after the meal, it says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into a boat and go before him to the other side while he sent away the multitudes. Like we see here, it's kind of interesting. It's like, they're all there. They're there for the moment when Jesus is feeding all these people. Then when the meal ends and everything's kind of coming to a close, and like Jesus makes the disciples get into a boat and leave without him to the other side of the sea. And how it's worded here, if you look at like the original words for this, it's actually pretty strongly worded. It's not like, hey guys, like why don't you get in a boat and take off? It's more like, guys, you need to get into a boat and you need to take off to the other side, and I'll catch up later. It's a pretty strongly worded statement. It wasn't just like a light suggestion. This was a strong urging by Jesus for them to get in the boat and go while he's still there, and he's the one that's going to dismiss the multitudes. Because I would think that, the disciples are following him. Like, they dedicated their life to him. They're they're following him everywhere that he goes. I don't think that they would just, happily like, okay, we're going to jump in the boat and take off. And there's like 20,000 people there still. It's like they're probably not like happy to just leave Jesus there by himself in this moment to deal with all of this. But for some reason, obviously, Jesus is sending them for a moment to go out in the boat and head across the sea. But there's actually a little more to the situation. Matthew doesn't record like the whole picture of the situation. There's a little bit more to what's going on here. And I want to look at the Gospel of John. So you can go there with us, or you can hear when I read it, but it's just a few books to the right in your Bible. We're going to go to John chapter 6. And there's more to this story that John actually records. And so I think it's good to see the whole picture here. So John 6, and I'll give you a moment. We're going to be reading verses 12 through 18 of John 6. So this kind of, you're going to see it picks up right where we had been. So John 6, starting in verse 12, it says, so when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain so nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up. They filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over from those that had been eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. And when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose because of a great wind that was blowing. It says they rowed about 3 or 4 miles, and then they saw Jesus walking on the sea. That's where we're going to get. But you see more to this picture. You see what's kind of going on here. There's a reason why Jesus is doing what he's doing. In verse 15 here in John, obviously, Jesus understands their heart. Like they saw the miracle that just happened. They're like, we just saw the miraculous. Like, truly, this must be the prophet who has come. Like, when what they're really saying is, this must be the Messiah. Like, after seeing the power of God, after seeing this small little lunch that a boy was carrying turned into a feast for 20,000 people, they're like, there's something to this guy is the Messiah. Like, this isn't natural. This isn't just an everyday thing. Like, we are seeing the Messiah. They say, truly the prophet has come into the world. But what happens next? It says Jesus perceives their intentions. In verse 15 of John, it says, when Jesus perceived what they were about to do, that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, then he departed. That's, probably really good intentions. They're like, we've talked about this before. The Israeli people at this time, they had this understanding, the Jewish people, they had this understanding that obviously that the Messiah was going to come, and he was going to come as a leader in like politics and in military. They're like, he's going to come as a king and a general. Like that's kind of what they were expecting. And so when they're like, this guy is the Messiah, they're like, he's not in that role yet. We're going to go take him and we're going to put him in that role. Like, you got 20,000 people here. I mean, well, kids and stuff. Kids could help. But they're like, we're going to go take him and we're going to we're going to make him king. Like, he is the Messiah. Like, they want to put him into that political role. They think that's going to be their responsibility. But obviously that's not Jesus's plan. Like, Jesus's plan was not to come as political and military leader. That's what these people thought. But Jesus is like, okay, we need to change the situation. Jesus starts to take control of the situation. Jesus's plan was not to be, I said, king in general. And the real thing is, like, his disciples were men too. Like, his disciples were men in the situation. They very well might get caught up like, oh, these people want to make Jesus king. Like, I can get in with that. like they're going to lead the charge. And so I think this is a moment where Jesus is like, you guys need to go. And I'm going to take care of this. So there's this thing happening that's not God's plan, but it seems like great intentions. Like, the people see the Messiah and they think that they're just going to help the process. But it's not Jesus' plan. And so Jesus is like, disciples, love you guys, you need to go. Don't get wrapped up in this. I'll take care of what's going on here. And so, like I said, the disciples, they get in this boat and they're heading out into the sea. Jesus took control of the situation. He's the one that dispersed the crowds. He's the one that sends the multitudes away. And it's already, as this is all happening, it's already nighttime, like, when this is all happening. Like, these people have been there. That's why the meal happened. Last week when we read, it was like it was late in the day. The people hadn't eaten, so that's why the meal happened. It was already late. So it's nighttime now. The disciples are out there rowing on the sea, and it sounds like they're actually kind of rowing into a storm. All of the people are heading back home, but then it's interesting that once again, like we talked about last week, once again, Jesus at this moment takes this opportunity. Disciples go, people go, Jesus goes too, alone up the mountain to pray again. It's like we talked about, like, a lot of this stuff has been happening pretty quickly, from the rejection to John getting killed, to being out alone, to people showing up, to the meal happening, to now the disciples. It's like all of this was happening pretty quickly. And we talked about last week, Jesus still, as man and God, like, he may have been, wanting to pray for the ministry forward. He very well may have been hurting from the things that were happening. But this passage, this whole miracle, is kind of bookended by the fact that he was isolated and by himself. He engaged with the people. He came out of isolation, engaged with people, loved the people, ministered to the people. And he's still, yet again, taking this moment to stop, to go up the mountain and to pray. I said, maybe he is still hurting. Maybe he just wants some time alone with his Father. Maybe he's praying for the ministry that will still be ahead of him. I think that this moment, and in seeing Jesus in the way that he carries us, I think this is still something, again, that we can learn from. Like, I think sometimes, like, when we're witnessing it with him, sometimes it's those isolated moments where it's just us and the Lord. Those isolated moments where it's just us and the Lord that bring the greatest healing from our struggles, but also bring us ever closer in our relationship and reliance upon him. Like, when it's just you and him at that moment, it's just like, God, I need you. God, I need your help. God, I want to move forward. It's just you and him. Like, Jesus is still taking those moments too. And it may be from the hurt. It may be for the forward progress. It may be for all of the above. But still in this moment, he saw a need to stop, to go up the mountain and pray. For us, it's alone time. Maybe it's, time that you set aside and you have a place where you can go and pray. Maybe it's in the car on the way to work where it's just you and the Lord. For Jesus, it was go walk up a mountain. We could technically do that too. But you don't have to. God can hear you wherever you're at. For me, since when I was, it was like 2 years, or almost 2 years, I spent driving back and forth from San Bernardino every day, and there was a good opportunity just to be me and the Lord. And so you can find those moments. Jesus was taking those moments. We should never take for granted the incredible truth that because of Jesus, we have the opportunity to come before God Almighty in prayer. I think sometimes maybe we take it lightly, like, I pray for dinner. But because of Christ, the whole picture of what Christ did, and even after, if you read the whole story, the death of Jesus and the resurrection, but when he died, when he gave up his life on the cross, there was an inner part of the temple where only the high priest was allowed to go once a year. And And it was the place where like the high priest got to go commune with God. But when Jesus died, like the thing that separated that, there was a giant veil that separated anybody else from ever going inside of there. That veil was literally torn in half, basically signifying that all of God's people now have access to him through Jesus. It's an incredible truth. It's something that we shouldn't take lightly. The fact that we can go to an almighty God and he hears us, that's no small thing. Jesus, still being Jesus, was still taking advantage of the time to spend with his Father. We'd be foolish not to as well. So even Jesus stopped. He went to prayer, maybe for the hurt, maybe for others, maybe for the mission. But we see that, we saw a little bit more of that picture in John 6. But back in Matthew 14, again, it's the same story. So from John 6, we saw the other events that were going on there. And back in Matthew 14, we see very much the same thing. In verse 23 of Matthew 14, it's the same account that Jesus sent the multitudes away. He went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was alone there. But then we get to verse 24. We get to verse 24 of Matthew 14, and the focus shifts. It says, "But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary." The wind was blowing against the boat. So the focus shifted from Jesus on the mountain now to the disciples down on the boat. And, when we see this, and we see in now verse 25, it says that now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them. The fourth watch of the night, it's in our terms, I have no idea. What does that mean? But this actually means something. And for these times and these peoples, the fourth watch of the night, for timeline for us, would be the hours between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So sometime between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. is when this starts going down. It's like the middle of the night. So, between 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., the disciples are obviously like graveyard shift. They're rowing through the sea. They're rowing straight through the night, just like Jesus told them. He's like, you guys go to the other side in front of me. So middle of the night, they're out there on the boat. They're rowing. The wind's blowing. The waves are hitting them. And like I said, they're probably dead tired after rowing at 3 o'clock in the morning through the sea. I feel like that would be a pretty tiring, place to be. But then they see someone, or in their mind, they see something walking across the water in the middle of the night, in the middle of the sea. And obviously, we just read it, their reaction was, it's a ghost. It's a ghost. But think about that. Think about their situation. Put us in that situation. It's, let's say, 3:45 in the morning. The wind is blowing. The waves are hitting you. You're with a group of guys trying to row through the sea in the middle of the night. I don't know if you've ever been on the water, when it's dark. You don't see nothing. This isn't a time when there's not natural light, or there's not electric lights all around the sea. It's probably pitch black out there. And they're rowing in the direction that they're supposed to be going in. Maybe if it's the last end of the fourth watch of the night, maybe there's a little bit of sun starting to peek up, but it's still late. It's still probably pretty dark. If we were in that same situation and you're tired and you're out on the sea, you see somebody walking across the water, is my eyes messed? What in the world is going on? Jesus didn't say, Jesus said he was going to come to them, but he didn't say how. And so it's they see this and they, their first intention is this is crazy. There is a ghost walking across the water. It's probably sleep deprived, and they're probably playing off each other. They're going crazy. They're scared. But Jesus, they hear him yelling about the ghost. And Jesus is like, it's okay, guys. It's me. You don't need to be afraid. And Peter, I love Peter. Peter's always kind of the first one to jump into a situation. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But he's usually the first one to jump into the situation. You see Peter speak up in verse 28. And Peter says, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And the way that this is translated, it kind of makes it sound like Peter might have doubted that this was actually Jesus on the water. Because we obviously, how it's worded for us, it says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. It sounds like there may be doubt there. But again, this is kind of like a weird translation thing where the original wording for this is a lot different in the sense it's more, Lord, since it's you out there on the water, tell me to come. Like, command me to come. There's not really doubt in these words, even though our writing kind of makes it sound like it. So Peter's really saying, Lord, since it is you walking across the water right now in the middle of the night, tell me to come out there with you. Just tell me to come. And that's kind of a weird response when you see Jesus walking on the water in the middle of the night, that your first response is, Jesus, tell me to come out on the water. It's kind of an interesting thing. Like I said, and it's not like it's perfectly calm waters. It's the wind's blowing, the waves are there. It's the middle of the night, and now we see, Peter and Jesus are out walking out on top of the water of the Sea of Galilee. Again, we just went from this crazy of we're going to feed 20,000 people with this little lunch to now these two guys are walking on water in the sea. It's Jesus and it's Peter, and it's incredible. Peter heard Jesus' command to come. Peter saw that it was Jesus out on the water. Peter had the faith to step out of the boat and start walking on the water towards Jesus. Well, let me read verse 30. So obviously in 29, Jesus said, come, and Peter came down out of the boat. He walked on the water to go see Jesus. But verse 30, but when he saw that the wind was boisterous, there was a lot of wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. When we see this, Peter definitively started in faith. He saw Jesus out on the water. He had the faith to say, Jesus, if you tell me to come, I will step out on that water and I'm going to start walking. That's real faith. It is real faith to step out of the boat and start walking. It is against every natural inclination in us to say that water is going to hold me up. That is against every natural inclination that we have. But Peter's I know who you are. And if you tell me to come, I will step out, that water will hold me, and I will walk towards you. In the middle of the waves, in the middle of the wind, I know that it's going to happen because I have the faith to believe that to be true. Peter got out. But, like I said, Peter started in faith. He started with his eyes on Jesus. He heard the command of Jesus to come. But then, Peter started looking around. Peter's oh man, there really is a lot of wind. There really is waves going on. It is the middle of the night. I am tired. Whatever else was going through his head. He started to see his surroundings, started to realize that this is a pretty crazy situation. And Peter started to get afraid. And as Peter's fear built, his faith kind of began to shrink in this moment. The fear came up, the faith started going down. And as that happened, Peter started to sink. I think this is an opportunity for us to, deal with, I think, a really important question and at least get a baseline. But it's just, Peter had the faith to step out. But what is faith? What is faith? Like I always do, little Google search. Google define faith. These are the first things that come up when you just, our normal dictionary, or Google brings the dictionary results. But the first one, it says it's a complete trust or confidence in someone or something. The second one, it says a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension, which is kind of a weird word, or understanding, which I added that, rather than proof. Spiritual apprehension is kind of should be more like comprehension, but it's the same wording there. So it's a strong belief in God or the doctrines or truth of a religion based on spiritual understanding rather than proof. And those definitions are okay. That's kind of that's the world's dictionary definition of the word faith. But it's definitely not the whole picture. So that's how the world would view faith. There's a passage I want to look at, and if you could go there together, or I'll read it too. It's going to be in Hebrews 11. But it's just to kind of give us a baseline. Hebrews 11. We're going to be in 1 through 3 of Hebrews 11. Give you a moment. So just the first 3 verses of Hebrews 11, it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for. Verse 1, it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. And then it goes on and it talks about all of these different examples of people that had this type of faith. And with the wording here, what the writer of Hebrews is essentially saying is, faith is what gives real substance to things that you can't see. Like there's a lot of things that you can't see, but faith is what gives it substance. Faith is what brings it to reality. I've never seen God with my own 2 eyes. I've never seen God with my own 2 eyes. Yet I believe in him completely. Like by the world standards, that probably doesn't make much sense. Like, you never seen him, why do you believe in him? That's, there's like the physical sight, and there's kind of the sight of faith. We're going to talk about that. But faith is what makes it make sense even when our eyes can't see it. Even if it doesn't make sense, faith makes it make sense even when our eyes don't see it. It's important to note that, faith isn't just something we conjure up to. It's like, I'm going to have faith now. It's not just something that we conjure up. Like there's a passage in Ephesians 2, and it says, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It says, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. And that gift of God is really connected to faith in this sentence, in these verses. Like faith is the gift of God that is given so that you can understand that which you cannot see. I can't see it, but in the faith that God gives me, I can now see and understand that it is true. Faith lets me see that. Faith lets me understand that, even when my eyes don't see it. The faith that allows us to truly believe in God is a God-given gift. And it might be an interesting thing to grasp that God gives out the faith to people that in turn opens our hearts and our minds to understand who he is. Faith is the element that is given to us by God that looks into the spiritual instead of being limited to only seeing the physical. It enables us to see God's hand at work in this world. It allows us to comprehend who he is. It allows us to see truth in Scripture by faith. Like faith is the only thing that makes these things work. There's a passage we don't have to go to this one, there's a passage in Romans 1, but in Romans 1 it basically says you can see this like the creation of this world. It basically says that anyone should be able to look at the creation of this whole world and see that there is a creator behind the making of this. This didn't just happen by accident. It says that in this passage too. He says that everything in this world wasn't made by something that we can see. It wasn't made by some visible thing because it was made by God. That's what he says here in Hebrews. But like I said before, it's faith that lets us see the truth that our eyes can't see. And that's really important. It's really important as we see even what's going on here with Peter and Matthew. Because as we see here in this whole situation that's happening, when we see what's going on in Matthew, we see that, in the middle of the night here, that Jesus and Peter, they're standing out in the middle of the water. They're not just standing in the middle of the water, they're standing on top of the water in the middle of the water. Maybe Peter a little less so at this point. But they're standing out on the water in the middle of this kind of storm that's kicking up. And we come back with this understanding as we come back to this passage with this understanding that our eyes physically see the world around us, but faith sees into the spiritual. It sees the things of God. And it's really important in Peter's situation because, like I said, in faith, we just read that, in faith, Peter stepped out of the boat. In faith, Peter saw the truth. Peter saw, Jesus, you are exactly who you say you are. I know your power. I know who you are. I see you walking on water right now. Tell me to come. Tell me to walk on the water. I'm coming. In faith, He saw that. In faith, he did that. In faith, he stepped out. Like I said, he wasn't just seeing the physical. He was seeing the spiritual truth of the situation in faith. The spiritual truth caused him to act in the physical world. So Peter had faith. But the important thing that we can learn here from Peter's situation is that it's also really easy to become overwhelmed with all of the things that we're seeing with our eyes too. In faith, we can see the spiritual truth of the situation. But like Peter's eyes started wandering and started seeing all of the things going on around him. And all of the things that were going on around him started kind of cloud out the sight of faith that he had. He's like, I see Jesus, I know who he is, but I see all this other stuff. And right now, this is starting to seem crazier than, the stuff that I'm seeing through faith. So like the eyesight started eclipsing the faith sight, however you want to say that. But that's like what's happening. It's overwhelming that in this moment. Like I said, he stepped out of the boat spiritually seeing that Jesus could absolutely make him walk on water as well. But then his eyes drifted to other things. It weakened his spiritual focus. Like he was focused on the fact that Jesus could make this happen. But then he, got distracted by the other things, and then things started going bad. That's when he started to sink. Peter at the end of verse 30, he cries out, Lord, save me. And I assume Peter could swim. I don't know, because he's a fisherman. He probably could swim. I mean, they're out in the boats all the time. I would hope so. But, he's starting to sink, and he sees Jesus still standing there, and, he's struggling now. He got distracted. He kind of, lost the sight of the focus of his faith. Now he's crying out, Lord, save me. And there's still beauty in this moment. Jesus wasn't like, forget you, Peter. I'm gonna let you sink. You don't believe in me enough. I'm gonna let you sink. That wasn't Jesus' response. Peter weakened in this moment. Peter lost sight in this moment. Peter started sinking into the water. Jesus wasn't like, forget you, Peter. Jesus' immediate response, reach the hand out. Grab hold of Peter. He's like, I got you. He pulled him up. He walked with him to the boat, walked with him on the water to the boat, and helped him get in. The reality here is Peter's a man. Peter's faith wasn't perfect. It was a gift of God that he had any faith at all. But his faith was still growing. It was still developing. He was still growing. But he was just a regular guy that was still just learning these incredible spiritual truths for the first time in a lot of ways, just like we are. Like I said, for us, same thing. God knows us. God knows we're not perfect at all. He knows our faith isn't perfect. Like I said, same thing for Peter. He gave us the faith in the first place. If we truly believe in him, then that's evidence that he gave us the faith to believe. But right now, we should be growing, we should be developing, we should be increasing in faith. There's a moment where the disciples asked Jesus, help, increase our faith. It's still a pursuit to be had. There was the initial faith of, I believe who Jesus is and he died for my sins. That's the initial faith by which someone comes to know and be saved. He died for my sins and he rose again. I believe that. Jesus, would you save me? I want to follow you. There's that initial faith, but then there is also the walking with Jesus for the rest of our life where our faith grows as we see him work, as we see his words true, as we see him answer prayer, as we become more and more aware of the fact that he is who he says he is. Our faith grows, our faith increases. But we're not there yet. We're not perfect in our faith. Peter had the incredible opportunity to see Jesus right in front of him. He still wasn't perfect in his faith because he's a man. He's still growing, just like we are. I said, for me, I've seen him answer prayer. I've seen him transform my life. I've seen him transform other lives. I have no doubt that he is real and that his words are true, but I'm still not perfect in my faith. Not perfect. There's a good example that I've heard many times before, and it's like the fact that, it's a common example, it's like the fact that you can't see the wind. It's the same thing. It's a faith thing. You can't see the wind, but I can see it blowing trees. Out here, you can see the sky turns brown. It's just When the wind gets blowing here, the sky turns brown, stuff starts getting, I saw that there's a wind advisory for like Monday, Tuesday, so we'll see the wind. Like, we won't see it, but we'll see the effects of the wind when it comes. The pool will be a disaster. I do not look forward to dealing. I can see the effects of the wind. It's not fun. It makes me have to work harder. But I can see the effects. And same thing, like, we can see what the wind does. And so that leads us to believe that there is wind. It's there. I can see the effects of God's hand in this world, in my life, in his truth, in his answers to prayer. He is there because I see his hand moving. Like, I see the effects of him. I know it to be true. Jesus, he looks at Peter in this moment, and he says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And this wasn't a belittling of Peter. He's just like, "Oh, Peter, I think this was like kind of just a friendly thing between them." He's like, "Why did you doubt? Like, you started go good. You stepped on the water. You started walking towards me." There's no answer recorded here from Peter. Like, Peter didn't answer this question, but I think this is a rhetorical question. Like, obviously Jesus knows the answer. Jesus knows, Peter, you're not perfect. But why did you doubt? You know who I am. But that's a growth statement, though. It's like, hopefully next time you don't doubt. Like, hopefully next time you do step. Hopefully you get that sure footing on water. Hopefully that's like, you don't doubt me the next time when we take this step. It's a rhetorical question. The answer was already known. Jesus knew where Peter was in his growth. And so, as we said, Jesus grabbed Peter, pulled him out of the water, walked him to the boat. And then they got onto the boat, and all of the other guys that were watching this, and they're like, that was their answer. It's like, truly, this is the Son of God. Like, they just saw him feed 20,000 people from nothing. They just saw him walking on water. They just saw him cause Peter to walk on water. They saw him save Peter and bring him to the boat. And they're like, truly, this is the Son of God. As he stepped on that boat, these people knew, the rest of the disciples, they knew who he was. Their faith was growing in that moment. I'm sure this was a faith-growing moment for them to see Jesus come walking across the water after all of the things that they had seen. Truly, this is the Son of God. And we won't hit on them, but there's the last verses here where, they get to the other side. Jesus continues in ministry, continues loving people, continues healing people, people gathering from all the areas surrounding. Jesus keeps ministering to people through that region. But, as we close today, as we looked at this passage, it's like what we just looked about, like we just talked about. Like, I want us to recognize that even these guys weren't perfect. They weren't perfect in their faith, and they were growing, and we need to be growing too. And I want us to grow. Like, I want us to know that he is exactly who he says he is. I want us to trust him. I want us to grow in our faith and trust him that when he brings a moment to our life that's like a step out of the boat moment, that we're going to step out of the boat and we're going to follow him. We learn through this moment that with Peter that we need to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Like, even with the winds and the waves or all of the things of life, we need to keep the focus. We need to keep the faith. We need to keep trusting. As we've been talking about this year, we need to keep abiding in Christ. And I say that so that together as a church family, we can be together seeking to grow in the faith, to follow Jesus wherever he leads, individually and all of us together. Like I said, he may very well bring you to a moment that's, come, step out of the boat. Will we have the faith to step out of the boat? That's going to look different in all of our lives. Like, Eileen and I, we've had step out of the boat moments. And difficult, like kind of interesting decisions and such. But we've seen God's hand work, and we've seen his faithfulness. We've seen how great that he is. So I encourage you, let's grow in faith together to follow Jesus wherever he leads. But let's also hold on to the hope that he's still got us in our weakness. He grabbed Peter out of that water and took him back to the boat. That's a wonderful thing. So, let's pray.